Good morning. My name's Alan Berkowitz, and I'm a plant ecologist and the head of education here at the Cary Institute. It's my pleasure to be here with you folks this morning, and I'm happy to answer your questions. So who's first?
When did you become a scientist?
I became a scientist. I started to become a scientist when I was in junior high school. And I started going to classes at the Science Museum in Philadelphia called the Franklin Institute. That's when I decided that I really wanted to study science, even more than just in school. And then in 9th grade, I had a wonderful biology teacher. And we went out and studied the trees in a little patch of woods right next to our high school. And I thought that was just the coolest thing, to be able to measure the trees and identify them and know how long they were living there and know why the different trees might be there. And that really sold me on becoming a scientist.
Can I have another question? How many years have you been a scientist?
That requires doing math. I'm 59 years old now, and maybe I started when I was 13. So what is that? 46 years? I think another way to answer your question is, you might think that a scientist has to have a certain kind of degree, a college degree. So I got my first college degree in 1976. So that was, what is that, 38 years ago? And I got my PhD in 1986. So that was 28 years ago. So you could say I've been a scientist for 28 years or 38 years or 46 years, depending on how you define being a scientist.
Okay, next question. Nate.
What is your favorite kind of insect or bug?
Wow, my favorite kind of insect or bug. I'm not really an insect person, but I think the answer is probably this wasp that I've only seen once or twice, that has, you know that insects, the female insect lays its eggs with a thing called an ovipositor. And there's this one wasp that the wasp itself is about 1 inch long, but its ovipositor is around 4 inches long. And it's this long, tiny little, like not any wider hardly than a hair, one of your hairs. But it's long, and it can actually drill into a dead log. And I've watched this wasp once drilling its ovipositor 3 inches into a dead log to lay its egg inside the log so that its larva could eat the food in the inside that was the dead log and grow into an adult insect. I thought that was probably my favorite insect.
My first question is, what's your favorite color?
I can't answer that question. Today it's blue. That's what the shirt I wore. I love red. I love green.
Oh, I knew it, because it's a part of nature.
Yeah, part of nature. But all those colors are part of nature. You can find every color in nature. And some people like the colors that are most unusual. Maybe most recently, maybe the best way to answer your question is to say the last time I said, isn't that an incredible color? And the last time I said that was about the red of a scarlet tanager, which is a bird that lives in our forest, but you don't see it that often. And it is the reddest red that I've ever seen in nature, and that's probably one of my favorite colors.
I have another question. What inspired you to be a scientist?
So what inspired me to be a scientist? Or do you mean who? It could be who or what, and I'll answer it both ways. In terms of who inspired me to be a scientist, my father is an engineer, and actually both my father and my mother were very enthusiastic about understanding how the world worked. And so there was lots of discussion in my family from a very young age just about how things work, even from what happens to the water that you that goes onto the soil, where does the rain go when it was raining and all of a sudden it's not raining and you don't know where all the water goes. We used to talk about that kind of thing at the dinner table. Not just science, we talked about how politics worked and how people worked, so there was lots of interest in growing up in understanding things. So that's a real important part of what influenced me. And then my parents influenced me, and then I told you my high school biology teacher, he was very, very important in influencing me to be interested in science. And then I think that the two professors that I had in college that taught me ecology helped me kind of decide definitely that I wanted to become an ecologist. So it's kind of a combination of people that influenced me and really loving to understand how things work. I guess I just think it's beautiful to understand how things work. So I get a real charge out of it. That's my... One more? Let's let somebody else go.
First of all, your parents are like my parents, and Leo. And my... Wait, how many schools did you have to go to become a scientist?
That's a really, really good question. So, of course, I think you guys could consider yourselves scientists, and you've just gone to 1 or 2 schools so far. I went to 2 different elementary schools, and then I went to a junior high school and a high school. Actually, I went to 2 high schools. So even before I was done my K-12 education, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd gone to 5 schools, right? Plus, I went to school at the Science Museum, like I told you about, so that kind of counts. In terms of getting more advanced training, I went to 1 college and got a bachelor's degree in science, in environmental science, and then I went to Cornell University for both my master's degree and my doctorate, my PhD. So I guess what did I say, 5, 6, 7 schools plus the Science Museum. So yeah, so it would be 8 schools that were really important in teaching me to be a scientist.
It took you 8 years?
No, it took a lot more years. 13 years of pre-college, and then 4 years of college and 6 years of graduate school. So that's 13 and 9 is 22 years of school, counting kindergarten through 12th grade.
Did you ever do any like flying experiments that went kind of like wonky?
Wonky experiments. Yes. So I made a couple of silly mistakes when I was, I did my research at Cornell on corn and sunflowers and how they kind of grew together or competed or helped each other grow. Turns out they don't help each other grow. So I had to grow them in different kinds of plots out in the field, which I'd have to plow and then smooth out and then plant the corn and the sunflowers. And one time I made a math mistake in figuring out how much fertilizer to put on, and I put 10 times, I made essentially a decimal point error. You guys might not, I don't know if you know. In other words, I didn't do my math right, and I put 100 instead of 10. So it was 10 times as much fertilizer, and the plants grew all wonky, and that wasn't a good thing. It was kind of a failure. So that's an example. Actually the same year, the experiment also got wonky for a very surprising reason. Another part of the experiment that I was trying to use, I was at this field that was totally flat, and it was all this sandy soil. It just seemed like as close to kind of a perfect kind of uniform, everything the same, and everything looked exactly the same. And the plants were big in one part of it and short in another part. So the plants were all different, even though this field looked like it was all should be exactly the same. And it turned out that when I dug down into the soil, where the plants were really small, around a foot down, there was this really dense, hard soil that the roots couldn't grow into. And so the plants couldn't grow a big enough root system, and they couldn't grow. So even though on the surface it looked like it was this perfectly smooth, uniform area, it turned out to be a terrible area for the kind of research that I was trying to do. So that's two examples of wonkiness in my research. You asked one?
What is your favorite research that you do?
Okay. My favorite research, well, I think that I'll say two things. On the ecology side, we're really discovering really, really interesting things about Baltimore, Maryland. We're studying Baltimore, we're doing ecological studies in Baltimore. And it's just the most amazing thing to start looking at a city the same way you would look at a lake or field or a forest. In other words, looking at all the organisms there, including the people, and the physical structures, including the houses and the roads and the storm drains, and the microorganisms and the processes that they do. It's been really, really interesting. And we've discovered lots of interesting things, lots of surprising things that make us realize that cities are more ecologically interesting than we had thought before. And then the other research I do is about people, how do people learn ecology? And I've discovered that people have a lot of ideas about ecology because we live in the world and we walk on the grass and we are thinking about, or we might not be thinking about it, but we're taking in information about the grass and the bees and the flowers and the soil and the dirt and all these things that people know something about. And it's really neat to see how they can go from that knowledge that they already have to really understanding things like what we were trying to do here with the water and the soil. So that research and how people build on what they know to know more is turned out to be really cool.
One more question, okay?
Did you ask one yet?
If you had to choose between one science experiment, what would you choose? Would you choose an electric experiment or a water experiment?
An electric experiment or a water experiment? Well, you know, I'm going to cheat on this one. A project that I did not end up doing, but I'll tell you about it because I think it was totally cool and it combines the two. So, hold on.
It's ready.
So there's another answer to where does some of the water go. Some of the water stays on the leaves. So, does anybody know how the water gets out of this leaf?
It evaporates out of the leaves.
Okay, it evaporates out of the leaves. So right now, actually, water is evaporating out of this leaf. And you could actually put this leaf in a plastic bag and come back a day or two later and there'll be water vapor inside the leaf, inside the bag. So it turns out that the water comes out of the leaf not through the kind of the skin of the leaf, what we call the cuticle, but there's these little holes in the leaf that have little protector cells on either side of them that open and close so that the holes can take in CO2 for photosynthesis, and then the water evaporates out of them. The holes, you can see them with a microscope, but they're too small to see with your naked eye. So a research project that I was going to do I was going to have to make these tiny, tiny, tiny little straws. You can think of it as a straw that's so tiny that you could stick it into one of those, into the leaf, and measure the electrical current inside the leaf. Because it turns out that the leaf opening and closing those holes involves electricity that the plant makes. It's kind of a current that the plant uses to open and close these holes. And that has to do with water. It opens the holes when it is losing water and taking in CO2, and when it wants to stop losing water, it can close the holes. And so that's kind of a connection between electricity and water, and probably not the kind of answer that you were expecting. I didn't end up doing that project, and this is an important lesson for you guys, or at least it's a lesson for me, because I thought, do I want to spend all summer making these tiny little microscopic straws and sticking them into leaves? And I was kind of picturing myself in a laboratory with a white coat and having to be really, 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 really careful. And that's not why I was interested in ecology. I wanted to be outside growing corn and sunflowers or whatever. So I chose not to do that project because I realized I didn't want to do the work. And when you're a scientist, you have to do lots and lots of work. So it's important that you like doing it. You pick something that you like doing. So that's, even though I was interested in the electricity and the water and the leaf, I decided that's not for me.